Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're digging into something pretty significant happening in the Philippines.
Yeah, it's Republic Act number 1, 2023, a big shakeup for their tax code.
And the headline grabber is value-added tax, VAT, right, coming to digital services.
Exactly. It's basically the Philippines updating its tax playbook for the digital age. We've got the actual law here, RA 1, 2023.
Okay.
And our mission really is to unpack what it all means. Who it affects, what changes for consumers, for the providers.
And cut through the legalese. Make it clear.
That's the plan.
All right, so VAT on digital services.
Yeah.
How does it actually change their existing tax law? What's the core update?
Well, the main change is in Section 105 of their National Internal Revenue Code. It used to cover, selling goods, leasing property, providing standard services.
Visible stuff.
Right. But now it explicitly adds digital services to that list. So the scope of what VAT applies to has definitely gotten wider.
Okay, and maybe just a quick reminder for everyone listening, VAT itself, what is it fundamentally?
Sure. It's an indirect tax. So the business providing the service or selling the goods, they're the ones who technically owe it.
But they charge the customer for it.
Usually, yes. They can pass that cost on to the buyer, the end consumer. It gets added to the price you pay.
And the law even mentions this could hit existing deals, like subscription.
It does mention that, yeah. So if you're already signed up for something, the price could potentially shift a bit to include this VAT down the line.
Interesting. Now, the law talks about things happening in the course of trade or business. What does that actually mean here?
That phrase basically defines which activities fall under the VAT net. It means any regular commercial or economic activity. Pretty standard.
Okay.
But here's the crucial part for digital. The law now makes it super clear that services rendered in the Philippines by non-resident foreign persons, so companies based outside the country, those are considered in the course of trade or business too, and specifically if it's a digital service and it's consumed in the Philippines.
Like streaming a movie or using an app there?
Exactly. Then that service is considered taxable there, even if the company providing it has zero physical presence, no office, nothing on the ground.
Wow. Okay, so that really pulls in the big global tech players.
It certainly seems designed to.
Now, I see the Act brings in new sections, 108A and 108B. This must be where they spell out the rules for digital services, right?
Spot on. Section 108A is titled Liability of Persons Providing Digital Services. Pretty direct.
And what does it say?
It lays out that any digital service provider, doesn't matter if they're based locally in the Philippines or overseas, is liable. They have to assess, collect, and remit the VAT on digital services that are consumed in the Philippines.
Okay, so the responsibility is on the provider. And does it define digital service? Because that seems kind of broad.
It does, thankfully. It defines it as basically any service supplied over the internet or an electronic network using IT where the supply is essentially automated. And they give examples, which really helps clarify things like online search engines.
Google searches.
Potentially, yes. Online marketplaces or e-marketplaces.
Amazon, Lazada, those type.
Could be, yeah. Cloud services, think storage, computing power, online media, online advertising, various online platforms, and even digital goods like ebooks, music downloads, software.
So a really wide range of common online activities.
It covers a lot of ground, definitely.
And it defines the digital service provider, too.
Yes. Simply put, it's anyone supplying these digital services to a consumer in the Philippines. It could be a local company or a foreign one.
And they make a distinction for foreign ones.
They do. They define a non-resident digital service provider as one without a physical presence in the Philippines. That distinction becomes important for some specific rules.
Got it. So local or foreign, if you provide these services to Filipinos, you're likely involved. Now, what about Section 108B? That seems focused on those non-residents.
It is. Section 108B zeroes in on the VAT-registered non-resident digital service providers. Their main job is to remit VAT on services consumed by people in the Philippines who are not VAT-registered themselves.
So basically, sales to regular individuals, not businesses.
Mostly, yes. But there's another layer here, specifically for online marketplaces run by these non-residents.
Okay.
If that non-resident marketplace controls key parts of the transaction for other non-resident sellers using their platform, like setting the terms and conditions or getting involved in the ordering or delivery, then the marketplace itself can be held liable for the VAT on those third-party sales, too.
Whoa. So the platform could owe VAT for sales made by other foreign sellers using its site.
If they meet those conditions of control, yes. That could have quite an impact on how international e-commerce platforms operate for Philippine customers.
That sounds potentially quite complex for them.
Mhm.
Are there any ways out, any exemptions from this VAT for digital stuff?
Yes, there are some important carve-outs in the updated Section 109. A big one is education.
Online education.
Specifically, yes, online courses, online seminars, online training, if they're provided by accredited private educational institutions or government ones, they're exempt from VAT.
Okay, that's significant.
And it also exempts the sale of online subscription services to these educational institutions.
So, if a university subscribes to an online research database,
That subscription service would likely be exempt, yes. Also, another key area, financial services.
like online banking?
Exactly. Services of banks and non-bank financial intermediaries, even when they're delivered through digital platforms, remain exempt.
Okay, so education and finance get a pass on this.
Right.
Good to know. Now, what about tax credits? Businesses usually get to offset the VAT they pay on their own purchases, right? Input
Yeah.
tax.
They usually do. But here's a really critical point for the foreign providers.
Uh-huh.
The amended Section 110 states very clearly, non-resident digital service providers are not allowed to claim creditable input tax.
No, not at all.
None. So the VAT they collect on their sales to Philippine consumers is basically just passed straight through to the Philippine government. They don't get to deduct VAT they might have paid on their own business expenses related to those sales.
Okay, that simplifies collection for the government, I guess, but it's a definite cost for the provider.
It is. It makes the VAT purely a collection and remittance duty for them on those specific transactions.
All right, let's talk practicalities. Invoicing. How does that work for a company maybe halfway around the world?
Section 113 covers invoicing. These VAT-registered non-resident digital service providers, they have to issue an invoice, specifically a digital sales or commercial invoice.
The digital invoice. Makes sense.
Yeah. And the requirements seem a bit streamlined compared to traditional VAT invoices. They need the date, a transaction reference number,
Okay.
some way to identify the consumer, though it doesn't specify exactly how detailed. That needs to be a brief description of the service, and the total amount paid, including the VAT.
So, simpler info. Any other breaks for them on paperwork?
Yes, the law also says they don't need to keep the really detailed subsidiary sales and purchase journals that other VAT-registered businesses typically do. So, again, it points towards a somewhat simplified compliance process for them.
Streamlined where possible seems to be the theme. How about actually paying the VAT they collect? And you mentioned something earlier, a reverse charge.
Right. So generally, VAT-registered folks file returns and pay periodically, but Section 114 introduces this reverse charge mechanism specifically for digital services bought from non-residents.
Okay, how does reverse charge work?
Think of it this way. If a business in the Philippines, one that is registered for VAT there, buys digital services from a non-resident provider.
It's like a Filipino company buying cloud services from a U.S. tech giant.
Exactly. In that scenario, the responsibility for remitting the VAT shifts. The Filipino company, the buyer, has to withhold the VAT from its payment and pay it directly to the Bureau of Internal Revenue, the BIR.
Ah, so the local business pays the tax, not the foreign seller in that case.
Correct. The charge is reversed from the seller to the buyer. It's a way to ensure VAT is captured on business-to-business transactions involving foreign digital suppliers.
Clever mechanism. Now, enforcement. What if these digital service providers, especially the overseas ones, just don't register or don't pay?
Well, the law gives the tax authorities teeth. Section 115 allows the Commissioner of Internal Revenue to suspend business operations for failure to comply, like not registering when required.
Suspend operations.
Yeah.
How do you do that to a website based overseas?
Well, the law gets specific for digital. It explicitly includes the power to order the blocking of digital services performed by non-compliant providers.
Blocking the service, like preventing access in the Philippines.
Exactly. That would be carried out by the Department of Information and Communications Technology, the DICT, working with the National Telecommunications Commission, NTC.
Wow, that's a pretty big stick.
It's a very direct consequence. Non-compliance could literally mean users in the Philippines can't access your service anymore.
That certainly gets attention. How do they even communicate with these global companies?
The law acknowledges the digital nature of it all. It mentions that communication, like official notices, can be sent via electronic mail.
Makes sense. And registration itself. Do all foreign providers need to register?
They need to register under Section 236 if their gross sales or receipts for these digital services consumed in the Philippines exceed the VAT threshold, or if it's reasonable to expect them to exceed it within 12 months.
Is there a threshold amount mentioned?
The main act refers back to the standard VAT threshold in the tax code, which might be updated separately. The key thing is they must register if they cross it. And the BIR is tasked with setting up a simplified, automated registration system specifically for these non-resident providers.
Okay, simplified registration, but backed by the threat of blocking. Seems clear. Now, is this just about boosting government revenue, or is there a stated purpose for the money?
There's actually a specific allocation mentioned in Section 288. For the first 5 years, this law is in effect. 5% of the incremental revenue collected specifically from the VAT on digital service providers will be earmarked.
Earmarked for what?
For the development of creative industries in the Philippines.
Oh, interesting. So taxing the digital economy to potentially fund things like film, animation, design.
That seems to be the idea. It's a specific reinvestment plan linked to this new tax source.
That's quite a policy link. Finally, the big question. When does this all kick in? What's the timeline?
It's a bit phased. The transitory clause, Section 14, says non-resident digital service providers actually become subject to VAT 120 days after the implementing rules and regulations, the IRR, take effect.
Okay, so there's a grace period after the detailed rules are out. And when are those rules due?
Section 15 gives the Department of Finance 90 days from the Act's effectivity date to issue the IRR after consulting relevant agencies and stakeholders.
So roughly 3 months for the rules, then another 4 months before the VAT collection fully starts for non-residents.
That seems to be the timeline for the obligation to start. However, Section 18 is important. It says the Act itself takes effect 15 days after its publication in the Official Gazette or a major newspaper.
Even without the detailed rules?
Yes. So the law is technically on the books very quickly, even if the full VAT liability for non-resident digital providers has that built-in 120-day delay pending the IRR.
Okay, got it. So let's try and wrap this up. The Philippines has brought VAT firmly into the digital realm with this new law, RA 12023.
Definitely.
It impacts both local and, significantly, international digital service providers selling to consumers in the Philippines.
Right. Those non-resident providers have specific duties, like collecting and remitting VAT, but they don't get input tax credits.
And we saw key exemptions for online education, from accredited institutions, and for digital financial services.
Exceptions, yes.
Plus, simplified invoicing but strong enforcement, including the power to actually block services that don't comply.
And that reverse charge mechanism for B2B transactions.
Right. And a slice of the revenue is set aside for creative industries. So the bottom line is the digital economy in the Philippines is now formally part of the VAT system.
That's the core takeaway. It's a modernization effort, really, trying to make the tax system catch up with how business is done today, especially across borders online. They've put thought into specific mechanisms for collection and enforcement in this digital space.
So here's the thought to leave everyone with. How will this actually play out? Will we see prices for streaming, software, or online platforms noticeably increase for users in the Philippines?
That's the million peso question, isn't it? Will providers absorb it, pass it on entirely, or maybe even reconsider offering some services if compliance seems too complex?
And looking bigger picture, what does this signal about where digital taxation is headed globally? We see more and more countries trying to figure this out.
It definitely adds the Philippines to that growing list of nations asserting their right to tax digital activity within their borders, regardless of where the provider is headquartered. It's a space to watch, for sure.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for breaking down this complex piece of legislation with us.
Glad to do it. It's important stuff.